Alara lived a life woven from the quiet hum of pages turning, the scent of old paper and dust motes dancing in sunbeams. Her domain was the Oak Haven Public Library, a grand, ivy-clad building that had stood sentinel over the town square for well over a century. Every morning, as the first rays of dawn kissed the stained glass window above the main entrance, Alara would unlock the heavy oak doors, a sense of profound peace settling over her as she stepped into the hushed sanctuary. Oak Haven itself was a town built on whispers, not of gossip, but of history, of nature, of forgotten tales. Nestled in a valley cradled by ancient, sprawling oaks, it was a place where time seemed to slow, allowing residents to savor the simple beauty of changing seasons and the comforting rhythm of community life. People here knew their neighbors, shared homegrown vegetables over garden fences, and gathered for storytelling evenings in the town hall. Alara, with her gentle smile and eyes that held the quiet wisdom of 1,000 stories, fit perfectly into its fabric. She wasn't one for grand pronouncements or boisterous laughter. Her joy resided in the subtle shifts of light, the perfect turn of phrase, the silent connection forged between a reader and a book. Her favorite corner of the library, and indeed of Oak Haven, was a small alcove tucked away behind the historical archives. It was rarely visited, dimly lit, and held an air of profound stillness. Locals affectionately called it the Whispering Nook. Legend had it that if one sat there long enough, truly listening, they could hear the faint whispers of stories untold, of forgotten dreams, of the town's very heart murmuring its secrets. Alara didn't believe in literal ghosts, but she did believe in the echoes of human emotion, the lingering energy of countless lives imprinted on a place. Sometimes, when the library was empty and the world outside was hushed by a soft snowfall or a gentle rain, she would close her eyes in the nook, feeling a peculiar sense of calm, as if the very air was breathing with her. It was her private sanctuary, a place where she felt a subtle current of magic, a quiet promise of something more. Alara was content, yet sometimes, especially in the Whispering Nook, a tiny, almost imperceptible whisper of longing would stir within her. It wasn't a desperate yearning, but a soft, hopeful curiosity about the kind of story that might one day unfurl for her. A story with its own charming, perhaps even enigmatic, protagonist. The first sign that her quiet narrative might be about to gain a new intriguing chapter arrived on a Tuesday, a day typically dedicated to shelving new acquisitions and preparing for the children's story hour. The library doors swung open, not with the familiar gentle creak of a regular, but with a confident, yet not jarring, push. Alara looked up from cataloging a first edition of a forgotten poet, her gaze drawn to the figure standing in the threshold, framed by the bright morning light. He was tall, with a lean build, and a shock of dark, slightly unruly hair that seemed to catch the light in a way that suggested depths of bronze and midnight. His eyes, even from a distance, were striking, a warm, deep hazel that held both intelligence and a hint of a quiet smile. He wasn't dressed like a typical Oak Haven resident. His clothes were simple, good quality, but with a certain relaxed artistry about them, like someone who valued comfort and understated elegance. He carried an old leather satchel slung over one shoulder, and his hands, long and strong, looked as though they were accustomed to creating or building. He scanned the vast space of the main reading room, his gaze lingering on the towering bookshelves, the intricate ceiling frescoes, and finally, Alara herself, perched behind her worn oak desk. A slow smile spread across his face, a genuine, easy expression that seemed to warm the air around him. "Good morning," he said, his voice a low, resonant baritone, exactly the kind of sound one might expect to hear echoing in a place like the Whispering Nook. It was soft, yet carried authority, a subtle melody that made Alara's heart give a tiny, unexpected flutter. "Good morning," Alara replied, her own voice a little softer than usual, a faint blush rising to her cheeks. She straightened, pushing a stray strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "Can I help you?" He walked towards her desk with an unhurried grace, his footsteps barely disturbing the quiet. "I hope so. My name is Rhys Thorne. I've just moved to Oak Haven, bought the old Miller cottage up on Holly Lane." Alara's eyebrows rose slightly. The Miller cottage was a charming, if slightly dilapidated, house on the edge of town, known for its overgrown garden and the elusive family of deer that frequented its grounds. It had been empty for years. "Oh, welcome to Oak Haven, Mr. Thorne. That's wonderful. We're glad to have you." "Please, call me Rhys," he said, extending a hand over the desk. His touch was firm, warm, and brief, but it left a pleasant tingle on her palm. And you are Elara Vance. I'm the head librarian here. Elara, he repeated, testing the name on his tongue, a faint smile playing on his lips. A beautiful name. It sounds like a whisper. Elara felt that blush deepen. No one had ever described her name quite like that. Thank you. What brings you to Oakhaven, Whis? And to the library? So early on your first day? He chuckled softly. Well, I'm a writer, actually. A novelist. And after years of living in the city, I felt an undeniable pull towards a quieter life, a place with a bit more soul. Oakhaven seemed to fit the bill perfectly. As for the library, it's always my first stop in a new town. Libraries are the heart of a community, don't you think? Repositories of memory and imagination. Don't you think? Elara's heart gave another tiny, enthusiastic leap. A writer. And one who appreciated libraries. This was a delightful development. I couldn't agree more. What kind of novels do you write, Whis? Stories about people? Mostly, he mused, leaning slightly against the desk, his gaze sweeping over the rows of books again, as if already searching for inspiration. Everyday magic, the unseen threads that connect us, the quiet dramas of human existence. I'm hoping Oakhaven will offer a fresh wellspring. He met her gaze, his eyes crinkling at the corners. And perhaps the library will be my first deep dive into its lore. Lore? Elara prompted, intrigued. Yes, every town has its stories, its legends, its unique whispers, Whis said, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more intimate, as if sharing a secret. I've heard Oakhaven has quite a few. Is there anything, in particular, that comes to mind? Something a bit off the beaten path? Elara felt a strange sense of recognition, a prickle of intuition. He was talking about Ohar whispers. Well, Oakhaven certainly has its share of local color, she began, trying to sound professional, despite the sudden flutter in her chest. There's the legend of the moon petal flowers that only bloom under a specific lunar phase up on Widow's Peak, or the story of the lost silver mine in the foothills. She paused. Then, on an impulse she couldn't quite explain, she added, and then there's the Whispering Nook, right here in the library. Whis's eyes widened almost imperceptibly, a flicker of genuine interest sparking within them. The Whispering Nook? I haven't heard of that one. Tell me more. Elara found herself smiling, a genuine, unreserved smile that reached her eyes. It's not really a grand legend, more of a local curiosity, a small alcove in the historical archives. People say if you sit there quietly, you can hear the echoes of the past, the town's secrets, its forgotten stories, a kind of collective whisper. A kind of collective whisper. A collective whisper, Whis repeated, his voice thoughtful. That sounds exactly like what I'm looking for. A tangible link to the intangible spirit of a place. Would you mind showing it to me? Not at all, Elara said, her heart doing a little happy jig. This was precisely the kind of interaction she had in her most secret moments hoped for. She stood up, smoothing the front of her sensible cardigan. Follow me. She led him through the main reading room, past the reference section, and deeper into the quiet labyrinth of the archives. The air grew cooler, heavier with the scent of aged paper and leather. Whis walked beside her, his presence a comforting warmth in the otherwise silent space. He didn't speak, but his eyes were alive, taking everything in, a writer's keen observation evident in every glance. Finally, they reached the small arched entrance to the Whispering Nook. It was indeed dim, with a single high window admitting only a sliver of filtered light. A sturdy, antique armchair sat in the center, inviting contemplation. This is it, Elara said softly, gesturing inside. Whis stepped into the nook, his hand gently tracing the rough stone of the wall. He ran his fingers over the spines of the few forgotten books shelved there, then turned to the armchair. He didn't sit immediately, but stood for a moment, head tilted, as if already listening. It's remarkable, he murmured, his voice hushed, almost a whisper itself. I can feel it, a certain resonance. It feels ancient, yet alive. He turned back to Elara, a question in his eyes. Do you ever sit here? Often, she confessed, feeling a lightness in her chest she hadn't realized was missing. It's my favorite spot in the library, my own personal quiet place. And what do you hear? He asked, his gaze soft, curious, as if truly wanting to know, not merely making polite conversation. Elara considered this. How to articulate the ineffable. Not voices. Not exactly, she began, searching for the right words. More like impressions, feelings. Sometimes I feel a great sadness, other times a profound joy. It's like the walls themselves remember, and they share those memories not in words, but in a deeper, more emotional language. Rhys nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. I understand. It's the echoes of the human heart, isn't it? The collective unconscious of a community, finding expression in the very stones. He finally sat in the armchair, leaning back, closing his eyes for a moment. Elara watched him, a strange, beautiful sense of peace settling over her. He truly understood him. After a few minutes, he opened his eyes, a serene smile on his face. Thank you for showing me this, Elara. It's more than I could have hoped for. It feels like home, in a way I hadn't expected to find so quickly. His gaze met hers, and for a fleeting moment, Elara felt as though they were the only two people in the world sharing a sacred secret. You're very welcome, Rhys, she replied, her voice barely audible. He stood up, his eyes still sparkling with a newfound wonder. I think I'll be spending a lot of time here, if that's all right. Perhaps doing some research for my next project. Maybe even just listening. The nook is always open, Elara said, feeling a warmth spread through her. The prospect of Rhys frequenting her quiet corner of the library was unexpectedly thrilling. Over the next few weeks, Rhys Thorne became a familiar, welcome presence in the Oakhaven Public Library. He was a creature of habit, arriving shortly after opening, usually with a thermos of tea and a well-worn notebook. He would spend hours in the whispering nook, sometimes reading obscure local history books Elara had unearthed for him, sometimes simply sitting with his eyes closed, a faint, thoughtful smile on his lips. Elara found herself subtly altering her routine to coincide with his. She'd make sure the nook was tidy, a fresh pot of herbal tea brewing in the staff room, just in case he preferred it to his own, and she'd find reasons to pass by the archives, just for a glimpse of his dark head bent over a book, or to catch the low murmur of his voice as he dictated notes into a small recorder. Their conversations grew longer, deeper. They started with library matters, obscure historical facts, literary recommendations, the proper care of ancient manuscripts. But soon they drifted into more personal territory. Elara learned that Rhys had grown up in a bustling city, but always felt a pull towards nature, a yearning for quieter places. He told her about his travels, the inspiration he drew from different cultures, the challenges of crafting a story from disparate threads. He spoke with a quiet passion that captivated her, making her lean in, eager to hear every word. In turn, Elara found herself opening up, sharing details about her own life she rarely discussed with others. She told him about her childhood, growing up in Oakhaven, learning to read before she could properly tie her shoes. She spoke of her love for the library, not just as a job, but as a calling, a place where she felt truly herself. She even confessed her quiet fascination with the whispering nook, her belief in its subtle magic, a belief she usually kept guarded. Rhys listened with an intensity that made her feel seen, truly understood. He never interrupted, only offered thoughtful questions or gentle nods of encouragement. He remembered details she'd mentioned weeks ago, bringing them up in later conversations, proving he truly heard her. One rainy afternoon, as the sky outside wept soft tears and the library was particularly quiet, Elara found Rhys in the nook, not reading, but simply staring out the small window, lost in thought. She approached cautiously, not wanting to disturb him. "Penny for your thoughts, Rhys?" she asked softly. He turned, his hazel eyes clouded with a touch of melancholy that quickly dissipated as he saw her. "Ah, Elara. Just contemplating the nature of whispers and echoes. Anything profound?" He smiled faintly. "Perhaps. I was thinking about how much of our lives are made up of things unsaid, unspoken. The glances, the gestures, the feelings we carry but never articulate, and how places like this nook seem to capture those echoes, those silent confessions." "It's true," Elara agreed, sitting on the edge of the old wooden table nearby, something she rarely did. "Sometimes I think the loudest stories are the ones that are never fully told, the ones that resonate deepest within us." "Exactly," he said, meeting her gaze. And sometimes it takes a special kind of listener to truly hear them. Someone with a quiet heart. His eyes lingered on hers, and Alara felt a warmth spread through her chest, a blush again rising to her cheeks. It felt like a compliment, a profound acknowledgement of her very essence. "You're a listener too, Rhys," she countered gently. "I've noticed that about you. You don't just hear words, you hear what's behind them." He gave a small, self-deprecating shrug. "Comes with the territory, I suppose, for a writer. But it's different with you, Alara. It feels easier, more natural, like we speak a similar language, even when we're silent." The air between them thickened, charged with an unspoken understanding. Alara's heart thrummed a gentle rhythm against her ribs. She wanted to say something, anything, to acknowledge the weight of his words, but found herself speechless. Rhys, sensing her quietude, shifted the conversation slightly. But the warmth remained. "I've been doing some digging into the local archives you helped me unearth," he said, picking up a thick, leather-bound journal from the table beside him. "This one, in particular. It belonged to Silas Oakhaven, one of the town's founders. He was a botanist, a naturalist, and a bit of a mystic, by the looks of it." "Silas Oakhaven?" Alara perked up, her librarian instincts kicking in. "He's famous for discovering several unique plant species in the surrounding forests, and for his rather eccentric garden." "Indeed," Rhys said, opening the journal carefully. "But he also wrote extensively about whispers of the earth, as he called them. He believed the land itself held memories, and that certain places like this nook were focal points for those energies. He even mentioned specific whispering stones hidden throughout the valley, said to amplify these feelings." Alara leaned closer, fascinated. "Whispering stones? I've never heard of that. Is it in the journal?" "It is," Rhys confirmed, his finger tracing a faded drawing on a page. "He describes them as smooth, river-worn stones, naturally imbued with a resonant quality. He believed that if you found them and arranged them in a particular pattern, they could sing the lost stories of the land, revealing glimpses of the past, or even hinting at the future. That sounds like something out of a fairy tale," Alara breathed, her imagination captivated. "But also, utterly Oakhaven." Rhys looked up from the journal, his hazel eyes alight with a shared wonder. "Isn't it? Silas wrote about one particular stone, the Heartstone, said to be the most powerful, located deep within the old Oakhaven woods, near a grove of ancient weeping willows. He claimed it held the whispers of true love, of destined connections." Alara felt a jolt, a sudden quickening of her pulse. "The weeping willows? That's a notoriously difficult part of the forest to navigate, overgrown, very few clear paths. Which makes it all the more intriguing, don't you think?" Rhys countered, a playful challenge in his eyes. "A quest, of sorts. A search for a genuine Oakhaven whisper." He closed the journal, looking directly at Alara. "I'm thinking of incorporating this legend into my new novel. But to do it justice, I'd need to experience it firsthand, to truly search for these whispering stones and especially the Heartstone." He paused, then added, his voice softer, "And I was hoping perhaps you might consider joining me, Alara, as my guide, my fellow explorer, my expert on Oakhaven lore, and maybe as someone who can help me hear the whispers too." Alara's breath hitched. A quest. With Rhys. To find whispering stones, and the Heartstone that held whispers of true love, of destined connections. The words hung in the air, imbued with a delicate, fragile magic. Her quiet, orderly life was about to take a turn she hadn't dared to dream of. The longing she'd felt in the whispering nook, the subtle current of magic, suddenly seemed to coalesce into a tangible possibility. I would like that very much, Rhys," she said, her voice a little breathless, a wide, genuine smile blooming across her face. The rain outside seemed to lighten, and a sliver of sunlight pierced through the clouds, casting a warm glow on the ancient books and on their hopeful faces. It felt like the beginning of something truly special, a story whispered into existence, just for them. The sliver of sunlight seemed to bless the moment, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, hopeful spirits. Alara felt a blush creep up her neck, a pleasant warmth that had nothing to do with the sunbeam. "A walk would be lovely, Rhys," she clarified, her smile softening further. "Whenever you're free, of course." Whis, for his part, looked as if he'd just been handed a rare first edition he'd long sought. His eyes, usually a calm sea, now held a sparkle, a nascent excitement. "Tomorrow, then," he suggested, his voice a little steadier now, but still carrying the same gentle timbre that made her feel instantly at ease. "The rain is supposed to clear completely. There's a path I know just beyond the old mill that leads to a clearing overlooking the valley. The wildflowers should be in full bloom." Ilara's eyes widened. Wildflowers? That sounds absolutely perfect. She imagined vibrant splashes of color, the scent of damp earth and blossoms, and the quiet company of Whis. "I'd love that." And so it was settled. A simple agreement, yet it felt monumental. A turning point in the quiet rhythm of their lives. Whis walked her to the door, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer than strictly necessary, a silent promise in his eyes. As she stepped out into the now gentle drizzle, she could feel his presence behind her, a warm echo in the cool air. The bell above the shop door chimed softly as she left, a cheerful note in the symphony of her blossoming anticipation. That evening, Ilara found herself humming as she organized her meager collection of books in her cottage. She usually spent her evenings reading, but tonight her mind kept drifting. What would Whis be like outside the sanctuary of his shop? Would he talk more, or would their connection remain in the comfortable silences they had already cultivated? She found herself wondering about his favorite color, his dreams, the stories hidden behind those observant eyes. The prospect of uncovering those layers was thrilling. The next morning dawned bright and clear, just as Whis had predicted. The air was crisp, washed clean by the rain, and the scent of burgeoning spring was everywhere. Ilara chose a simple dress, practical for walking, but with a cheerful floral pattern that matched her mood. A little before the agreed time, she found herself walking towards the whispering nook, a flutter of nerves and excitement dancing in her stomach. Whis was already waiting outside, leaning against the ancient oak that shaded his shop. He wasn't dressed much differently from his usual attire, a simple linen shirt and sturdy trousers, but the morning light caught the subtle threads of silver in his dark hair, and there was a quiet elegance to him she hadn't fully appreciated before. He straightened as she approached, a soft smile gracing his lips. "Good morning, Ilara," he said, his voice as smooth as polished stone. "You look lovely." "Good morning, Whis," she replied, feeling a blush warm her cheeks again. "And you too. Ready for our adventure?" He chuckled, a low, pleasant sound. "As ready as I'll ever be." He gestured down the lane. "The path begins just past the old mill." Their walk was everything Ilara had hoped for and more. The path wound through fields still glistening with dew, past an ancient stone mill whose wheel remained still, moss-covered and dignified. Whis pointed out different birds, identifying their calls with an almost uncanny precision. He knew the names of the wildflowers they passed, sharing small anecdotes about their properties or local legends associated with them. Ilara found herself enchanted not just by the beauty of the surroundings, but by the quiet passion in Whis's voice as he spoke of them. He was different outside the shop, less guarded. He still had his thoughtful silences, but they were interspersed with moments of unexpected humor and genuine warmth. He listened intently when she spoke, asking questions that showed he truly heard her, not just the words, but the sentiment behind them. She found herself telling him about her childhood, her love for stories that transported her, and the gentle ache she sometimes felt for a place to truly belong. "I think you found it here, Ilara," Whis said softly, as they reached the clearing. And indeed, it felt like it. The clearing was a symphony of color: crimson poppies, azure forget-me-nots, golden buttercups, and delicate white daisies danced in the gentle breeze. Beyond them the valley stretched out, a patchwork quilt of green fields and distant forests, all bathed in the golden light of the morning sun. It was breathtaking. "Oh, Whis," Ilara breathed, spinning slowly to take it all in. "It's magnificent. Thank you for bringing me here." He watched her, a pleased expression on his face. "I thought you might appreciate it. It's one of my favorite spots for quiet reflection." He settled onto a smooth, sun-warmed rock, inviting her to join him. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, simply absorbing the beauty. The only sounds were the distant buzz of bees, the rustle of leaves, and the gentle murmur of the wind. It was in these shared silences that Ilara felt their connection deepen, a wordless understanding passing between them. "Do you ever feel like places hold memories, Whis?" Ilara asked eventually, her gaze sweeping over the valley. "Like this clearing, it feels ancient, full of stories, even if we don't know them. Rhys nodded slowly. I do. The entire village, in fact. That's why I love old books so much. They're not just paper and ink. They're vessels of forgotten voices, echoes of lives lived. And sometimes, he lowered his voice, I think some places here truly remember. The Whispering Nook, for instance. It's more than just a name. The Whispering Nook. Elara turned to him, her eyes wide with curiosity. You think so too? I felt it the other day, a sort of hum, like the air was alive with something more than just static. He smiled, a rare, genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Precisely. It's subtle, but it's there. A gentle magic, a resonance. Some say it's the collective stories of generations, woven into the very fabric of the place. Others believe it's a direct connection to the heart of the earth. Whatever it is, Elara mused, it feels peaceful and welcoming. She looked at him. Like you do, Rhys. His smile softened, and for a moment, the air between them shimmered with an unspoken emotion. Thank you, Elara, he said, his voice a little gruff. That means a great deal. They spent another hour in the clearing, talking, laughing, sharing small observations. Rhys even pulled out a small, worn, leather-bound notebook and sketched a few of the wildflowers, his hands surprisingly deft and artistic. Elara watched him, fascinated by this new facet of his personality. He truly was a man of hidden depths, and she felt a thrill at the prospect of exploring them. As the sun climbed higher, casting longer shadows, they began their walk back. Elara felt lighthearted, as if a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying had been lifted. She felt seen, truly seen, by Rhys. And she, in turn, felt a profound connection to him, a sense of belonging that was both comforting and exhilarating. Back at the shop, Rhys insisted she come in for a cup of herbal tea. The air inside was cool and fragrant, a sanctuary from the midday sun. As they sipped their tea, surrounded by stories, Elara felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. Thank you, Rhys, she said genuinely. This morning was perfect. He met her gaze, his dark eyes warm. The pleasure was all mine, Elara. Perhaps we could explore another path soon? There's a hidden waterfall not far from here, said to have crystal clear waters. I would love that, she replied, her heart swelling with happiness. The idea of more adventures with Rhys, more discoveries, felt like a promise of endless possibilities. Over the next few weeks, their nascent friendship blossomed into something deeper, more intertwined. Their dates became a cherished routine. They explored the forgotten corners of the village, uncovering ancient wishing wells, moss-covered statues, and sun-dappled groves that seemed to hum with the same gentle magic as the Whispering Nook. Rhys would share local folklore, and Elara would share tales from the books she'd read, weaving them into the fabric of their shared experiences. They discovered a mutual love for baking. Rhys, it turned out, had a surprising talent for making artisanal bread, while Elara's specialty was delicate fruit tarts. Their evenings often culminated in one of them arriving at the other's door with a freshly baked treat, followed by hours of conversation over tea, sometimes in Rhys's bookshop, sometimes in Elara's cozy cottage, filled with the scent of wildflowers she'd gathered. Elara found herself spending more and more time in the Whispering Nook, not just as a customer, but as a silent, welcome presence. She would sit in a plush armchair near the window, a book open in her lap, but often her gaze would drift to Rhys. She loved watching him work, his brow furrowed in concentration as he catalogued a new acquisition, or the gentle way he handled a fragile old tome. She noticed the way his smile reached his eyes when he talked about a particularly beloved author, or how his fingers would tap a rhythmic beat on the counter when he was deep in thought. Rhys, in turn, seemed to thrive on her presence. The shop, which had always felt like a solitary haven, now felt warmer, brighter. He found himself looking forward to her quiet arrival, the soft swish of her skirt, the faint scent of lavender that always seemed to cling to her. He'd catch her watching him, a soft, amused smile on her lips, and he'd feel a warmth spread through his chest, a sensation he hadn't known he was missing until now. One rainy afternoon, a particularly fierce storm kept customers away. Elara was curled up in her usual armchair reading a book of Celtic myths. Rhys was behind the counter, polishing a set of antique brass bookends. The rhythmic drumming of rain against the window pane created a soothing backdrop. "Rhys," Elara said, looking up from her book. Have you ever felt truly at home before coming to this village? He paused, the polishing cloth still in his hand. He considered her question carefully. Not in the way I do now, he admitted, his voice low. I've always sought places of quiet, of solitude, where I could be surrounded by stories. But before, there was always a feeling of transience, even in my own apartment. Here it's different. It's as if the village itself has embraced me. He looked at her, his eyes serious. And you, Ilara, have made it feel even more like home. Ilara's heart fluttered at his words. I feel the same, she confessed, setting her book aside. I've always loved moving, seeing new places. But there was always a restlessness, a feeling that I was searching for something I couldn't quite name. But since I arrived here, since I met you, that restlessness has quieted. It feels like I've found what I was looking for. A comfortable silence settled between them, filled with the unspoken understanding of their shared feelings. The rain outside seemed to intensify, but inside the whispering nook, a profound sense of warmth and belonging grew. Do you ever think about the future, Whis? Ilara asked, breaking the quiet. Not in a grand planning way, but just what you hope for. Whis leaned against the counter, his gaze thoughtful. I used to think my future was simply more of the past, more books, more quiet, more solitude. But now, new. He looked around his shop, then back at Ilara, a soft smile touching his lips. Now I find myself hoping for more shared moments, more walks to the clearing, more wildflower sketches, more of your incredible tarts. His gaze intensified, meeting hers directly. More of you, Ilara. Ilara felt a blush creep up her cheeks, but she met his gaze without flinching. Her heart pounded a gentle rhythm against her ribs. I hope for the same, Whis. More of everything we found together here. Their connection deepened further in the following weeks. They had fallen into a comfortable pattern of companionship, punctuated by moments of intense, unspoken understanding. They knew each other's routines, their quirks, their quiet habits. Whis learned that Ilara hummed softly when she was deep in thought, and that she preferred her tea with a hint of honey. Ilara discovered that Whis had an endearing habit of running a hand through his hair when he was nervous or excited, and that he had a surprisingly sweet tooth for dark chocolate. One crisp autumn evening, as the leaves outside the whispering nook began to turn fiery shades of red and gold, Ilara was helping Whis organize a new shipment of old maps. The scent of aged paper and autumn air filled the shop. She carefully unrolled a large, intricate map of an ancient, fictional kingdom, its borders adorned with whimsical sea monsters and mythical creatures. This is incredible, Whis, she breathed, tracing a finger along a mythical river. It looks like something out of a fairy tale. Whis leaned over her shoulder, his proximity sending a shiver down her spine. It is, he murmured. It's from an old series of children's fantasy novels, very rare. The cartographer was renowned for his imagination. As he spoke, his hand brushed hers accidentally on the map. A small electric current seemed to pass between them, and they both stilled, suddenly acutely aware of the warmth of their skin against each other. Whis slowly straightened, but his gaze lingered on her hand, then moved up to meet her eyes. The air in the shop seemed to thicken, charged with an unspoken tension. Ilara, he began, his voice a little softer than usual. There's something He trailed off, looking uncertain. Ilara's heart beat a little faster. She had felt this shift between them for a while now, this gentle pull towards something more profound than friendship. She wondered if he felt it too, this subtle current of magic that seemed to gather around them, especially in the whispering nook. Just then, the bell above the door chimed, announcing a customer. A cheerful, elderly woman, Mrs. Gable, a regular who always bought books for her grandchildren, bustled in, her umbrella dripping gently onto the mat. Oh, Whis, dear, I hope I'm not interrupting anything, she chirped, her eyes twinkling as she took in their close proximity and the slightly flustered expressions on their faces. Just need a few more of those delightful fairy tales for young Thomas. He's simply devouring them. Whis cleared his throat, a faint blush on his cheeks. Not at all, Mrs. Gable, just admiring a new acquisition. He gestured towards the map, effectively deflecting the moment. Ilara smiled at Mrs. Gable, feeling a mix of amusement and a touch of disappointment. The moment had passed, interrupted by the charming reality of village life. Later that evening, After Mrs. Gable had left with her armful of books, and the rain had softened to a gentle drizzle, Rhys locked up the shop. Elara stood by the doorway, reluctant to leave. "Rhys," she said, her voice quiet, "what was it you were going to say earlier?" He turned, his hands in his pockets, his gaze searching hers. "Only that I've grown very accustomed to your company, Elara. More than accustomed in truth. I value it immensely." It wasn't quite what she had hoped for, but it was enough, for now. A step, a gentle acknowledgement of the growing intimacy between them. "I value yours too, Rhys," she replied, her voice soft. "More than you know." He walked her to her cottage door, the light from her window casting a warm glow on the porch. The air was cool and damp, carrying the scent of wet earth and distant wood smoke. As they stood there, a comfortable silence settled between them once more. "Good night, Elara," he said, his eyes lingering on hers. "Good night, Rhys," she whispered. He hesitated, then very gently, he reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers brushed her cheek, a touch so light it was almost ethereal, yet it sent a wave of warmth through her. For a fleeting second, she thought he might lean closer, but he pulled his hand back, a wistful expression on his face. "Sleep well," he said, and then turned and walked back into the deepening twilight. Elara watched him go, her hand involuntarily going to her cheek where he had touched her. Her heart ached with a sweet longing. They were so close, yet there was still an unspoken barrier between them, a delicate veil waiting to be lifted. The magic of the whispering nook seemed to pulse around her, urging them forward, whispering promises of deeper connections. The next few days were filled with a subtle tension. The comfortable ease was still there, but beneath it, a new current hummed, a quiet anticipation. Rhys was perhaps a little more attentive, his glances more frequent and intense. Elara found herself catching his eye more often, a silent question passing between them. One afternoon, as Elara was helping Rhys reshelve some particularly heavy theology texts, she lost her footing on a small stool. She gasped, bracing herself for a tumble. But Rhys was there in an instant, his arms wrapping around her waist, steadying her. She stumbled against him, her back against his chest, her hands instinctively clutching his shoulders. For a moment, they were pressed close, her back against his chest, his arms still around her. She could feel the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. The scent of old paper and Rhys's subtle earthy cologne filled her senses. Her breath hitched. "Are you all right?" he murmured, his voice close to her ear, sending shivers down her spine. "Yes," she managed, her voice a little shaky. "Yes, I'm fine. Thank you." He slowly loosened his grip, but didn't entirely let go. He turned her gently so she faced him, his hand still resting lightly on her arms. His dark eyes searched hers, filled with a mixture of concern and something deeper, something she couldn't quite name but felt echoing in her own heart. "You startled me," he said, a soft smile touching his lips. "I thought you were going to take a nasty fall." "I might have if you hadn't been so quick," she replied, her gaze caught in the depths of his. They stood there for a beat, time seeming to stretch and warp around them. The quiet hum of the whispering nook seemed to intensify, weaving itself into the very air they breathed. It felt like the world outside the shop had ceased to exist, leaving only them in this enchanted space, on the precipice of something wonderful and profound. The unspoken words hung in the air, tangible, shimmering. The magic, ever present, seemed to hold its breath, waiting. His eyes, the color of warm honey under sunlight, held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. A faint blush crept up Elara's neck, blooming on her cheeks. She felt a strange, thrilling warmth spread through her chest, a sensation both unfamiliar and profoundly comforting. It was as if a part of her, long dormant, had just flickered to life. The world outside them, the bustling street, the worries of her day, all receded into an indistinct murmur. Here, in the whispering nook, under Liam's steady gaze, there was only the quiet thrum of possibility. A soft, almost imperceptible smile touched Liam's lips, a slow unfurling that sent a ripple of warmth through Elara. He didn't look away, nor did he move, but the intensity in his eyes softened, becoming an invitation rather than a challenge. It was a silent question, and Elara found herself nodding, a tiny, almost involuntary movement that acknowledged the unspoken. "Elara," he finally murmured, his voice a low, melodic tone that seemed to perfectly suit the quiet sanctity of the shop. It was the first time she'd heard her name on his lips, and it felt like a caress, a recognition. "Liam?" she replied, her own voice a little breathy, a little shy. The sound of their names exchanged in this hushed space felt like a secret whispered between them. He gently shifted his weight, and the spell, while not broken, shifted. He gestured vaguely with his chin towards the book in her hands. "That's a special one of my favorites, actually." Ilara looked down at the volume. Why the Midnight Gardeners, a collection of forgotten fairy tales, beautifully bound in emerald green leather. She traced the gold leaf lettering with her thumb, feeling a renewed appreciation for its beauty. "It's exquisite," she said, looking back up at him. "I've never seen anything quite like it. The illustrations, they're almost alive." "They are," Liam agreed, stepping a fraction closer, though still maintaining a respectful distance. He leaned in slightly, his gaze falling to the open page where a tiny, luminous sprite seemed to dance among moon-kissed flowers. The artist, Lyra Fenwick, was said to have a touch of true magic in her brushstrokes. Legend has it, if you look closely enough, you can almost hear the rustle of the sprite's wings. Ilara leaned closer too, intrigued. She peered at the delicate drawing, half expecting to see movement, to hear a faint shimmer. The scent of old paper, combined with a subtle woody fragrance that must have been Liam's, filled her senses. It was a comforting, grounding scent. "Do you believe in magic, Ilara?" Liam asked, his voice soft, almost a whisper, as if sharing a confidence. Ilara paused, considering. Growing up, she had always been a dreamer, but the practicalities of life had a way of dimming the fantastical. Yet, standing here, in this enchanting shop, with its hidden corners and whispered stories, with Liam's compelling eyes on her, it felt easier to believe. "I think," she began slowly, "I want to, or perhaps I believe it exists in certain places and certain moments, like this one." She gestured around the nook, then back to the book. Liam's smile widened, a genuine, heartwarming curve of his lips. "Exactly. Not the kind of magic that makes things disappear or conjures fire, but the quiet kind. The kind that makes a chance encounter feel like destiny, or a forgotten book hold a new truth." He paused, then added, his voice dropping slightly, "The kind that makes you feel seen." The last word hung in the air between them, shimmering with unspoken meaning. Ilara felt a fresh wave of heat in her cheeks. Had he seen her, in a way few people ever had. Not just the quiet librarian, but the woman who still harbored a secret love for wonder. "Would you like some tea, Ilara?" Liam offered, stepping back slightly, though his gaze remained gentle and inviting. "I've just put on a fresh pot of my grandmother's special blend. It's said to enhance the magic of a good story." Ilara's eyes lit up. "I'd love some, thank you." She truly would. The idea of sharing tea, of lingering in this space, felt like a gift. Wonderful. He gestured towards a small, cozy alcove tucked away in the back of the shop, where two worn armchairs sat by a low, round table laden with a collection of antique teacups and a steaming teapot. "Make yourself comfortable. I'll just get a few things." Ilara carefully placed The Midnight Gardeners back on its shelf, a silent promise to return to it, then made her way to the alcove. The armchairs were deep and inviting, upholstered in a soft forest green velvet that felt wonderfully plush beneath her fingers. A small, intricately carved wooden chessboard sat on a side table, pieces neatly arranged, hinting at quiet evenings spent in contemplation. The scent of brewing tea was now more pronounced, a delicate mix of bergamot, lavender, and something else, something subtly sweet and herbaceous. She settled into one of the chairs, feeling a profound sense of ease wash over her. It was a rare sensation for Ilara, who often felt a quiet hum of anxiety even in moments of calm. But here, in the whispering nook, surrounded by the comforting presence of old books and the promise of warm tea, it was as if her worries had been gently coaxed to sleep. Liam returned a moment later, carrying a small plate of delicate shortbread biscuits dusted with powdered sugar and 2 steaming cups of tea. He moved with a quiet grace, his presence soothing rather than imposing. He placed the plate on the table, then handed her a teacup. It was a beautiful thing, fine bone china adorned with tiny hand-painted forget-me-nots. "My grandmother collected these," he explained, noticing her admiration for the cup. "She believed every cup held a memory, and every memory deserved to be savored." He settled into the armchair opposite her, the springs creaking softly in protest, then offered her the plate of biscuits. These are her recipe too, a little taste of magic, she called them. Alara took a biscuit, biting into its buttery, melt-in-your-mouth goodness. They're delicious, she said, her eyes closing briefly in appreciation. Your grandmother sounds like a wonderful woman. She was, Liam confirmed, a fond, wistful smile playing on his lips. She taught me everything I know about books and about life. This shop was her dream, and now it's mine to keep alive. He took a sip of his tea, his gaze sweeping around the nook with a deep affection. She always said that a good bookshop isn't just a place to buy books. It's a sanctuary, a place where stories find their readers, and sometimes where readers find a bit of themselves. I can feel that, Alara admitted, looking around the shop with new eyes. It's not just the books. There's an atmosphere here, a sense of welcome, of history. That's the whispers, Liam said, his eyes twinkling. The collective echoes of all the stories read within these walls, all the secrets shared between authors and readers. They say if you listen closely, you can hear them. Alara chuckled softly. I think I might be starting to. She took a sip of her tea. It was fragrant and soothing, with a subtle sweetness that lingered on her tongue. What kind of stories do you find yourself drawn to, Liam? He leaned back in his chair, considering. Oh, a bit of everything, really. I have a soft spot for classic literature, the kind that delves into the human condition with timeless wisdom. But I also love a good adventure, something that sweeps you away to another world. And of course, anything with a touch of magic, even if it's just the magic of human connection. He paused, then turned his gaze back to her, that gentle intensity returning. What about you, Alara? What calls to your heart? Alara felt a familiar shyness resurface, but it was tempered by the warmth of the tea and Liam's genuine interest. I've always loved stories that transport you. Historical fiction, anything with a strong sense of place and time. And I have a secret fondness for fairy tales, even the darker, lesser-known ones. The ones that remind you there is still wonder in the world, even when things are difficult. She hesitated, then added, a little more quietly, I'm a librarian, so I spend my days surrounded by stories, but it's different when you're choosing one for yourself. It feels more personal. It is personal, Liam affirmed, nodding slowly. A book chosen for oneself is a mirror, a window, a companion. It tells you as much about the reader as it does about the story itself. He took another biscuit, offering her the plate again. So, the Midnight Gardeners. What drew you to it today? Alara picked another biscuit, feeling a comfortable ease settle between them. I suppose it was the cover initially. That emerald green is so captivating. But then I opened it, and the illustrations, they just pulled me in. They reminded me of the kind of stories I used to lose myself in as a child. Before life became more about practicality than possibility. She gave a small, self-deprecating smile. Liam's expression softened with understanding. It's easy to lose sight of the wonder when the world demands so much of us, he said gently. But that's why places like this exist, isn't it? To remind us that the magic is still there, waiting to be rediscovered. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes holding hers. Perhaps the Midnight Gardeners is calling to you, Alara, to remind you of that forgotten possibility. His words resonated deeply within her. It felt as if he had peeled back a layer of her carefully constructed adult self, seeing the girl who still yearned for enchantment. A strange, hopeful flutter stirred in her chest. It was a feeling she hadn't known she'd been missing until now. They continued to talk, the conversation flowing easily from books to life, from the mundane to the magical. Liam spoke of his grandmother's quirky wisdom, the challenges of running an independent bookstore in a digital age, and his quiet passion for preserving stories. Alara, in turn, found herself sharing things she rarely divulged, her quiet satisfaction in helping people find the right book at the library, her love for long walks in the botanical gardens, her secret dream of one day writing a story of her own. Liam listened intently, his gaze unwavering, making her feel as though every word she uttered was significant and cherished. He had a way of asking open-ended questions that gently encouraged her to elaborate, to delve a little deeper into her thoughts and feelings. It was a refreshing change from the polite, surface-level conversations she was accustomed to. You have a storyteller's heart, Alara, Liam observed softly, After she finished describing a particularly vivid dream she'd had recently, one filled with ancient forests and talking animals. "I can hear it in the way you describe things, the way you weave details together." Ilara blushed, flattered. "I don't know about that. I see things, sometimes, and they turn into stories in my head." "That's precisely it," he said, his smile warm. "That's where all the best stories begin, a seed of an idea, nurtured by imagination." He paused, then leaned forward, his voice taking on a conspiratorial tone. "There's a little secret corner in this shop, Ilara, that my grandmother used to call the Dream Weaver's Nook. It's said to inspire creativity, to help nascent stories take root." Ilara's curiosity was piqued. "A Dream Weaver's Nook? Where is it?" Liam rose from his chair, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "Come with me." He led her deeper into the shop, past towering shelves filled with leather-bound tomes and brightly colored paperbacks. The air grew cooler, the light softer, filtered through stained glass panels depicting mythical creatures. They wound their way through narrow aisles, the scent of old paper and wood growing stronger, until they reached a small, almost hidden archway draped with a heavy velvet curtain. Liam gently pushed the curtain aside, revealing a tiny circular room. It was barely larger than a closet, but it felt expansive, like stepping into another world. The walls were lined with shelves, but these held not books, but an eclectic collection of curiosities. Smooth, river-worn stones, a pressed four-leaf clover under glass, a tiny, intricately carved wooden bird, a handful of iridescent feathers, and an antique quill pen resting on a scroll of parchment. In the center of the room, a single, plush velvet cushion lay on the floor, illuminated by a beam of sunlight that angled perfectly through a small, circular window high above. "This is it," Liam whispered, his voice full of reverence. "The Dream Weaver's Nook? My grandmother would come here whenever she felt stuck, or when she needed a little spark of inspiration." He gestured to the cushion. "She always said it helped her tap into the universe's untold stories." Ilara stepped inside, feeling a profound sense of wonder. The air in the nook hummed with a quiet energy, almost tangible. She reached out, tracing the smooth surface of a polished stone, then gently touched the delicate feathers. Each object seemed to hold a story, a whisper from the past. She sat down on the velvet cushion, feeling a strange sense of belonging. "It's beautiful, Liam," she breathed, looking up at him, her eyes wide with appreciation. "Thank you for showing me this." He smiled, a soft, warm expression that made her heart skip a beat. "I only show it to people I think will appreciate its magic, and I had a feeling you would." He sat down opposite her, his knees almost touching hers in the small space. The proximity was thrilling, a gentle current passing between them. "Do you ever use it for your own stories?" Ilara asked, gesturing to the quill. Liam chuckled. "Occasionally. More often I just sit here and listen. Sometimes the stories whisper to you, you just have to be quiet enough to hear them." He picked up a small, smooth piece of sea glass, turning it over in his fingers. "My grandmother always encouraged me to look for the stories in everyday things. She said the mundane often held the most profound truths." They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, just listening, breathing in the quiet magic of the Dream Weaver's Nook. Ilara felt a peculiar clarity settle over her, a sense that anything was possible, that her own dormant stories might indeed be waiting to unfurl. She glanced at Liam, his profile illuminated by the sunlight, and felt a quiet certainty that this man, with his kind eyes and gentle soul, understood the hidden corners of her own heart in a way no one else ever had. "Ilara," Liam said, breaking the silence, his voice soft. "There's something about you. Something that feels like a beautiful, untold story. And I find myself wanting to read every chapter." His words, spoken with such sincerity in this intimate space, made her blush deeply. Her gaze met his, and for a moment, the world outside this tiny nook seemed to vanish entirely. The intensity was back, but it was a warm, inviting intensity, a promise. "And you, Liam," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "You feel like a story I've been waiting to discover my whole life." A slow, tender smile spread across Liam's face, and he reached out, his hand gently covering hers where it rested on the cushion between them. His touch was warm, comforting, and sent a shiver of pure delight through her. It wasn't a bold, demanding touch, but a quiet, reassuring one, an affirmation of the connection growing between them. I'd like to keep discovering it, Alara, he said, his thumb gently stroking the back of her hand. If you'd let me. Alara's heart fluttered like the wings of the sprite in ID Midnight Gardeners. She looked into his eyes, seeing a reflection of her own burgeoning hope, her own quiet joy. I'd like that very much, Liam. The afternoon sunlight began to slant, casting longer shadows across the shop. The quiet hum of the whispering nook seemed to deepen, a contented sigh from the old building. They emerged from the Dreamweaver's nook, feeling a lightness in their steps, a new current of possibility flowing between them. Liam walked her to the door, the bell above chiming softly as he opened it. The bustling street outside seemed brighter, louder, more vibrant than it had before. It was as if the magic of the nook had infused the entire world with a new glow. Thank you, Liam, Alara said, turning to face him, the late afternoon sun painting gold in her hair. For the tea, the biscuits, the stories, and for showing me the Dreamweaver's nook. My pleasure, Alara, he replied, his hand still resting lightly on the doorframe, preventing her from leaving just yet. His gaze was warm, lingering. I hope you'll come back soon, perhaps for dinner? I know a wonderful little Italian place just around the corner. They make a pasta dish that's almost as magical as my grandmother's tea. Ilara's smile was genuine, radiant. The thought of extending this delightful day of seeing Liam again filled her with a joyful anticipation she hadn't felt in years. I'd love to, Liam. Just tell me when. How about tomorrow evening, he suggested, his eyes sparkling. Say, 7 o'clock? 7 o'clock sounds perfect, Ilara confirmed, her heart singing. He finally opened the door fully, and Alara stepped out onto the pavement, but not before looking back at him, at the gentle, hopeful smile on his face. He watched her go, a quiet sentinel in the doorway of his enchanting shop. As Alara walked home, the city sounds seemed to harmonize into a gentle melody. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of rose and lavender, and she noticed the intricate details of the architecture, the vibrant colors of the flowers spilling from window boxes, the laughter of children playing in the park. Everything felt sharper, more beautiful, as if a veil had been lifted from her eyes. She clutched her handbag where she had carefully tucked a small, smooth piece of sea glass Liam had given her as she left the Dreamweaver's nook. A little piece of the nook to carry with you, he had said, his fingers brushing hers as he placed it in her palm. It was warm from his touch, a tangible reminder of the afternoon's enchantment. The quiet librarian, who had always found solace in the pages of books, now felt a new story beginning to unfold in her own life. A story with charming characters, emotional depth, and a heartwarming promise. She couldn't wait to turn the page. The whispers of the nook seemed to follow her, not just in her ears, but in her heart, promising more magic, more connection, and a future brighter than any fairy tale she had ever read. She smiled, a soft, contented smile, already anticipating the warmth of Liam's gaze, the melody of his voice, and the quiet magic of their next shared moment. She didn't have to wait long. A simple, sweet text from Liam arrived that evening, inviting her for coffee at their nook the following afternoon. When she stepped through the familiar glass doors, her heart fluttered with a new kind of anticipation. Liam was already there, nursing a steaming mug, his smile lighting up the cozy corner they'd found. It was even better than she'd imagined. They talked for hours, the gentle hum of the bookstore a comforting backdrop to their blossoming connection. Alara found herself sharing dreams she hadn't voiced aloud in years. The quiet longing for a life filled with meaning, connection, and perhaps a love as timeless as the tales she devoured. Liam listened, truly listened, his hand occasionally reaching across the small table to lightly touch hers, a silent reassurance. He spoke of his own aspirations, of wanting to build a life rooted in genuine connection, to find someone who saw the magic in the everyday, just as she did. There was an ease between them, a sense of having known each other always, even as they uncovered new layers with every shared glance and whispered secret. It feels like, Alara began, then hesitated, a shy smile playing on her lips. Like a story unfolding? Liam finished, his eyes warm and knowing. I feel it too, Alara, like we found our own opening chapter, here in a place that's always been about beginnings. He confessed he'd been drawn to her from the moment she walked into the nook, a quiet light in a world often too loud. He saw her passion, her gentle spirit, and knew he had to know more. Alara's heart swelled. This wasn't just a fantasy. It was real. tangible, and infinitely more wonderful than anything she'd ever imagined. The Nook had indeed worked its magic, guiding her to a love that felt both destined and delightfully new. "So, what happens in the next chapter?" she whispered, a playful glint in her eyes. Liam chuckled, his fingers gently tracing the back of her hand. "I imagine it involves many more shared coffees, whispered secrets, and perhaps," he leaned in, his gaze tender, "a lifetime of discovering our story, page by page." He kissed her then, a soft, lingering kiss that tasted of coffee and promise, a quiet affirmation of a love just beginning to write itself into existence. Elara closed her eyes, feeling the warmth spread through her, a profound sense of belonging settling deep in her soul. The Nook, once a sanctuary for her solitary heart, was now the sacred space where her greatest story had truly begun, a tale of love, connection, and happily ever after, waiting patiently for them to fill its pages.